All right. Well, thank you so much, Marissa, for creating this wonderful platform, and moreover, not even just the event, but really the community gathering that we're all in right now. And thanks for all of you for investing your time right here, right now, right in a very difficult topic, conflict resolution. I mean, who loves talking about conflict? Well, besides me and a whole bunch of other dispute resolution folks. Most people don't like doing this, right? So what I'm going to do today is just quickly go over some slides, some foundational content, kind of give people a lay of the land when it comes to dealing with conflict, right? The psychology of conflict. I won't say too much about the brain, but I can certainly geek out about that part. What we know from science, what we know from, more practical humanistic, right? Not so much science, but literally being in the body, what we know about these things so that you yourself in these moments, whether it's at home, whether it's, with coworkers, direct reports, or even executive leadership, how you can engage more constructively. And again, I'm going to put that a little bit down in the beginning, as Marissa said, kind of just talking head style, right? And then in the second half, in the last 30 minutes, then we'll have some confidential time, right? To really get into the weeds of these things. What are you really dealing with? It does not matter to me where you're coming from with this stuff. I really invite and encourage each and every one of you, to be courageous. And I invite and request that everyone else in communion, which I am sure you all have experience in doing, but in also helping to create that safe space, right? We want a space where people can be, again, courageous to put themselves out there, to open themselves up to learn, to try new things. And we recognize that that's not always something that happens gracefully the first time. As a matter of fact, most times it doesn't, right? All right. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Okay. So can everyone see that? Okay, I'm seeing a head nod. Great. All right, awesome. I will try, by the way, to keep an eye on the chat, but as Marissa did mention, this first part will be more talking head style. If there is a burning question, something that is really necessary to get everyone clarity that they need in the moment, I'll try to address that. And Marissa, feel free again to jump in and interrupt me if I'm missing something essential. All right, so conflict resolution 101, recognizing when we're in conflict, preparing for it, and managing it, right? So a little bit about me. I'm a McNair Scholar. I've been published at Johns Hopkins University. I am a fellow for the American Bar Association. So I tell people I hang around with attorneys and judges all the time. No, I do not want to be one. That is for very particular reasons. And it has to do with the fact that I believe in collaborative resolutions. That is when people go to litigation, they don't go to litigation to be friends. They don't come out friends on the other side. And so if we're able to resolve disputes early on, we are very much able to resolve them collaboratively through these win-win engagements, right? I've taken over 500 cases in dispute resolution. I've satisfied 150 clients with the help of some associate consultants. We are a small team of 5, certified in HR and project management, all that kind of stuff. I won't go too much into that belief, but again, this really is about changing win-lose dynamics in which one person has to fall in order for the other one to win, into collaborative engagements that help people truly win together. A little bit about our team. We take an integrated approach to risk and business management. Now, obviously, we do dispute resolution. Sometimes that is within the context of law and litigation, but many times it's before litigation. As soon as a risk comes up, a concern, change often provokes conflict, right? We come in those high risk areas to de-escalate, to stabilize change, and to essentially get everyone working on the same page before we lose out on value, we lose relationships, and we lose time and money, right? I won't say too much else about that, but feel free to ask me. Quick little roadmap. We're going to talk about the reality of where and how conflicts occur, how to prepare yourself, actually being in the conflict, right? And I'm going to propose or present rather an individual accountability plan framework, which I have created based on my studies and experiences mitigating and managing workplace disputes. So that'll be an interesting framework for us to talk over in the confidential, unrecorded portion of this presentation here. So where do conflicts, occur, right? Where are they coming up? What are people dealing with in the real world? Personality clashes, right? We know that this is a big part of what people deal with. So communication styles is a big one. Studies show that millennials like myself tend to prefer messaging, right? Instant messaging, while Gen Xers prefer phone calls. Boomers, right? They're from a very different time. By the way, we now have 5 generations in the workplace at one time. There's not very many of the silent generation, but they certainly are out there. There are a lot of different communication styles. There's no right and wrong way, right? I want to be clear about that. These differences can, if they're left unmanaged, certainly create disputes. And if those disputes are left unmanaged, they can certainly become entrenched and codified into the institution itself, which I'll get into a little bit later. And in conflict, we often have fight, flight, freeze, or appease responses, right? Which again, I'll get into later, but this is when part of the brain takes over. It's a very, very old part of the brain. It's not super advanced. It kind of knows just how to break things and run away, right? Competing priorities is another big one, right? You see this a lot in matrix organizations. So you've got multiple managers, right? I've got my project manager, and I've got my executive director manager. And these people are asking very conflicting things of me, pulling me in different directions. And neither one of them are understanding why I don't have that deliverable, right? That makes it very, very hard. Communication breakdown is also very common. We know from conflict resolution studies, psychology, that when suspicion takes hold, it's a psychological stance. People begin suspecting you don't say what you mean. And even if you say what you mean, you don't really mean it. There must be some ulterior motives going on. And that really breaks down the communication so that even if people are being authentic with each other, it's difficult to actually advance the conflict resolution effort because communication is so difficult, right? Simple exchanges are no longer simple. They get muddier. It gets more difficult. It's just all kinds of messy when it really doesn't have to be, right? Another one, performance issues. Now, I really don't have to go into that, but it's a very ripe opportunity for conflict because these moments tend to lend themselves into people going intense, getting defensive, right? Leadership styles. I know there's very, very different styles of
Yeah.
leadership. It looks like we've got, if you wouldn't mind just putting yourself on mute, if I would appreciate that. Okay, so let's keep going. Conflict warning signs. So, there are different buckets, as it were. I like to put it in nice and simple terms. These buckets are basically where the conflict is coming from by and large, right? So people, lower levels of social and emotional intelligence. Let's face it, some folks haven't had as much training. Before my conflict resolution studies and practicum, that was myself. I did not grow up with a whole lot of talk about your feelings, Alec, right? So I now really, and frankly, it was a disadvantage for me. So I'll just put myself out there, use myself as an example. That makes it difficult when in conflict. Pre-existing mindsets, right? I know what the solution is. I have the power, regardless of what you want, regardless of what you think. And there's certainly organizations that still rely heavily on power. The smart ones are really going further to create inclusive cultures, not because the law requires them, right? Not necessarily because they're going to lose a whole bunch of money on turnover costs and so forth, but because they realize, Project Aristotle, right, funded by Google, when people feel included and they feel very cared about, well, surprise, they really, really care about their organization. They commit themselves to their organization, and productivity increases, all this stuff. So people is a big bucket, right? People is a very big component to kind of give warning of when these issues are going to come up. Relational. You see upticks in conflict with others, right? Now the ecosystem is becoming very tense. You walk into a room and there's a whole lot of history. Well, you might not know what the history is, for example, when you started a job, but you can certainly tell more often than not. These two people don't seem to talk, and I'm noticing that. Why is that? I don't know, but I'm noticing it. Difficulty communicating. Again, like I mentioned, if there is a tough interaction, that can kind of create a feel that lingers and makes it more difficult in the future, right? So something small kind of ends up becoming or cascading to become bigger than it already was. Misunderstandings are pretty straightforward, but you'd be surprised how much they happen. Fatigue. I don't have to tell anyone about this. We're all living in very, very difficult times. Showing up to difficult conversations when you already feel incredibly stressed, it lowers your threshold for engaging in difficult situations, right? There's a part of the brain called the hippocampus. It determines whether you're safe or whether you're not. And so whether you should go into reptile brain and, smash or run away from things, or you should engage intellectually, creatively, and hear the other person, etc. So when we are fatigued and we have those lower tolerance levels, more often than not, the hippocampus is restricted, it's very tired, and automatically, or not automatically, but more often than not, it goes into that reptile mode, right? And then the organizations, in-group, out-group dynamics, we've all been a part of those, where we've all observed those. And very often, power dynamics, right? Again, I mentioned formal power dynamics where bosses might assert themselves as the boss and they sort of use that card, as it were. And then other times there's informal power dynamics, right? The whispering ear, somebody that's influencing, even though they don't necessarily have a kind of a title, as it were. Norms and practices, right? The way that we do things. Is that seen as okay to be self-promoting? Is it seen as egotistical on the other hand? What is the culture of the organization? What behaviors and patterns do they accept? And how do those behaviors and patterns play out over time to maybe produce conflict? And then, of course, we have policy issues. All right. So how do we go about preparing ourselves, right, for this collaborative approach that I talk about, that produces more of the win-wins, that keeps people less on the defensive, more on the, hey, let's separate the people from the problem and try to tackle this issue together as colleagues, as friends? So the first thing to recognize here is the reality of conflict in the brain, right? A lot of times, I mentioned the hippocampus, right? It's what determines whether we're thinking and perceiving the situation and the other people in terms of danger, or in terms of safety, right? I can put my thoughts out there. I can creatively problem solve because I feel safe. I trust that the other person does want to problem solve with me, right? It's natural to, at certain points, respond defensively. We all have that hardwired in our brain for a reason. It's a survival mechanism. So there's nothing inherently wrong with it. Where it gets difficult is, when we're responding more often with a certain defensiveness than not, when we're, and that sort of thing. So what I recommend is that people really practice building up their tolerance. It really is like a strength. The more you engage in difficult conversations, again, assuming a kind of safety, right? We have a certain level of safety. The other person is not going to be physically violent with us, right? For example, I mediate some family cases where the parties cannot be in the same room for very important reasons. Okay, just making sure the chat is okay. So yeah, practicing engaging in those difficult conversations really does add strength. There are 4 amygdala reactions, which I mentioned before. Oftentimes people hear of fight or flight, and that is very true. Those are the most prominent reactions. But we also have observed in neuroscience the freeze and appease reactions, right? Freeze, I don't know what to do. And appease, which is, okay, let's do it your way, right? And those are often trauma responses. I won't talk too much about trauma, but the appease is often a learned behavior. Safety, on the other hand, this is all about thought partnership, right? Reflective practice. Am I making you feel uncomfortable, I might say, as a mediator in a situation? Or is there something I can adjust, something that I can change that would make you feel more comfortable, right? As a mediator, I have no formal power. I'm not your attorney. I'm not a judge. I'm not any of these things. So the permission is fundamentally the power that I have in the situation and no more. And so it could very much feel like a disadvantage to be maybe a direct report in a situation with your boss where they clearly have the power. there are still, areas to draw from in order to create power in a situation that you might not formally have it within. So again, inquiry-based learning, doing this as a basis of feedback, again, asking the people as you go, even before you create a situation, back to the communication styles, right? Would you feel more comfortable having this in person, on the phone, maybe through text? I know some people actually feel more comfortable if they can stop and reflect, choose their words before sending. That makes some people more comfortable, right? Incorporating objectives as information from a partner, not as mandates from a boss, right? So again, when I've been in a managerial role, I've positioned, these are as young as could be, right? People that are barely old enough to have a job, and still, thinking of them and actually treating them, right? Positioning them as a partner in the solution that we're trying to build towards, that goes a long way to producing psychological safety. Autonomy and ownership in a conflict, right? So it's not just about making people feel safe in conflict for the sake of the process. It's also for the sake of the outcome. When the other participant in a conflict or a conversation actually engage on their own terms, it improves satisfaction, it increases the chances of agreement, and once people commit, it increases the commitment to that agreement. Why is that? Well, if I get you to commit to something, or if I get you to agree rather to something that, you yourself have generated options in, because you yourself have been vocal about your fears and concerns when it comes to this process, right? Then you yourself are going to be honest about, well, you've addressed all my concerns. I am willing to commit to that, right? Because it stands on its own merit, rather than, okay, I'm doing this because you're my boss and I'm worried about my job, right? Okay, so going on to the principles of collaboration, everything can be negotiated. Well, just about everything, right? Money, timeline, priorities, behaviors. And I say this as a person that is very familiar with things that are way past termination of an employee, way past, potential pulling out of a client on a project, worth millions of dollars, right? These things can still be negotiated. It's just a matter of how can we get creative. So if even those things are still collaboratively settleable, as it were, then you can think pretty much everything is, even behaviors. Even if people aren't willing to negotiate as much as you thought, it's very rarely all or nothing. Again, we even if they won't negotiate boulders, what about rocks? If not rocks, what about just these little pebbles, right? If we can adjust a behavior, then we can adjust a process, a dynamic, the relationship, and ultimately the outcomes, even if it doesn't feel that way at first. Collaboration really is, the foundation of, all of this process. And it's not what people often think. I define it very simply as it's being assertive and cooperative. So you're not appeasing and advocating only for what the other person wants. Okay, let's do it your way. You're the boss. It is being assertive, saying, well, there are certain things that I need, and I want you to get what you need as well. So let's be cooperative and think together. I'm just not going to self-sacrifice in this dynamic. And I believe, right, if you're of the collaborative mind, I believe that if we both get what we want and what we need, right, more importantly, what we need, maybe not always what we want, but what we need, then we are a more resilient team set up for success, right? If you have me as your employee working on bare minimum, writing the margins, then the first trip to a mechanic is going to put me out in such a way that now I have to leave my role or miss work, etc. And that's actually going to disrupt your team, your progress, right? So we're coming in with that. I need to get what I need as well as you need to get what you need. So let's work together. Recognition that conflict is emotional, right? Leveling and empathizing first is a huge part of it. Again, this helps the other person to feel emotionally and psychologically safe. which then enables them to do the same for us. And so we start a positive cycle in that way. Co-creation of agreements, or even just the norms of engagement, how we're going to speak to each other. Do I know and trust you and I'm comfortable with you calling me by my first name or a nickname, or would I prefer something more formal, right? Mr. Chapa. Okay, fine, right? Whatever creates that psychological safety, and co-creating not just the agreements, but even the way that we relate to each other is critical. Timing matters, as I tell people all the time. The difference between a dispute and a collaboration is often just timing, right? Focusing on expanding the pie, right? Not thinking of, well, in order for me to have 60, you need to have 40. In order for you to have 60, I need to have 40, right? That's a very zero-sum fixed mindset. And there certainly are situations like that. But wherever possible, I encourage people to think about, where is it that we can create value by virtue of working together? And then once we've created that collaborative value, how can we work on splitting up that pie, right? So that we're both happier on the other side of that engagement than if we chose to just separate and go our own ways. Now, sometimes, again, that is ultimately the best option for people in some situations. More often than not, there are opportunities to expand the pie and split the pie, and again, have people happier on the other side of it. And just remember, think about integration. How does the other side see it, right? In a negotiation, it's much like sales. I don't know if anybody has experience in sales, but it very much is this process of, what does the other side really care about? And even if you have the perfect agreement in front of them, if you're pushing it down their throat, and if you're talking about it and illustrating it from your point of view, right, the things that you really care about, it's going to be a hard sell to the other side, even if it is the perfect agreement for them. So think about how they see it. Try to communicate it in a way that's from their point of view, right, what they really care about. And that's going to have a lot more success. I'm running a little bit short on time, so I'm not going to have time to get to the individual accountability plan. I suppose I can use it a little bit
Go
as
ahead,
we
Alec.
talk in the, what's that?
You can go ahead and talk if you would like to. We
Okay,
have time.
sure. Um, well, let me see if I can get through it. I'll give myself 5 after. Some helpful reminders. Front load the conversation as much as possible, right? Set the expectations. It's okay if we disagree. I want us to lean into these expectations. I truly value what you think and care about, because you are a part of our team. And I believe that everyone on our team needs to get what they need, right? Acknowledge where there are past struggles, for example. Preventing the need for, a kind of defensive introduction and so forth, right? People coming out with their sword and their shield right from the get-go, which of course exhausts a lot of time and energy, just de-escalating and bringing things to more of a collaborative space before there can be any progress usually, right? Expressing an openness to listen and collaborate. The things that you would want to hear if you were in their shoes, that goes a long way. I also remind myself, when I'm about to engage in these conversations, take the journey from I to we. What do I mean when I say that? In the brain, pain forces and creates a kind of myopic perspective. We literally focus on ourselves. So, you can imagine the degree to which pain escalates, right? So I have a severe injury on my hand, a huge gash. There's almost nothing else I can think about in that moment besides not only myself, but literally the source of pain, not my leg, not my foot, not my shoulder, the point of pain. And so when we're in that psychological place where it is very difficult, that is valid, that is real, that is okay. What we do is we take the journey from I to we by going to that place of harm, of hurt, of pain, and allowing it to be what it is, unpacking it, processing it, doing that with a friend or a trusted peer if that's what's really needed. And ultimately processing through those layers of emotions, right? So we might think about, a married couple, and the wife maybe wants to do something very romantic. I say this from experience, right? Football game, right? No, I want to watch a football game. So the wife feels very angry. But when she processes that with somebody she trusted, or she trusts, she can unpack that to say, well, I even more than angry, I felt disrespected, right? Because I feel like in that moment, my partner didn't respect me and what I really want, because and I've been putting it out there, and I let him know and all. So I felt disrespected. And even more than that, I felt sad because I felt like he didn't value me as much as I value him. And that really hurts. That even hurts to say out loud, right? And even more than that sadness, I feel a kind of fear that maybe my relationship ultimately does not mean as much to him as it does to me. And I wonder from that, right? I'm very afraid because I wonder what is the ultimate trajectory of our relationship? Is it going where I want it to go and all this stuff, right? And underneath even that, I'm scared because I love this person, right? So that is the kind of emotional place where we can connect on what we both care about. And if we can go there, right, that is the journey from I to we. Now we're thinking much less defensively, and more importantly, we're thinking collectively, right? We're thinking about what we both care about, and we're aiming towards the same thing. And that serves as a very powerful reminder when emotions rise up again. Hey, let's remember what we're doing. We're on the same team. We're working towards the same objective. All right, here we go. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to open up the floor. I would love to, just ask everyone how this lands. If you have comments, feedback, questions, you want to talk through a situation, by all means, I recommend and again invite everyone into a confidential space that does not leave this room, and a space in which we can all feel welcome to be courageous to take that step in learning.
Thank you so much, Alec. Because we are going to be stopping the recording, if someone is watching this recording back, how can they get in touch with you and how can you help them?
Absolutely. So Alec at Mosaic Collaborative, that's MOSAIC, mosaiccollaborative.com. You can also do mosaiccollaborative.consulting. That's my website. I offer dispute resolution services for pending litigation, pre-litigation, all the way to just general HR consulting. I also do housing dispute resolution cases. So reach out for pretty much anything and everything when it comes to conflict.
Amazing. Thank you so much.